Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It's Friday, December 12th. So glad you could join me for another exciting workshopping situation we've got here. Let's see, who do we have on hand? Katie Dozier's over there. Unfortunately, Katie's sick. She caught the thing that we've all gotten recently. That's why there's no poetry space today, but we'll be back with an exciting episode next week, I'm sure. Let's see, Nancy Sabanik is here, Al of Arcadium is here, Danette Bermia, Jamie Thomas, Katie Scruggs Galloway, Cindy Guntherman, Steve Horrell is here, Leslie Ann Sketcherton, it's a hard name to say, Skechterson, there you go. Rose Lennard is here, Mark Grenier is here, Kimberly Gibson Tran, Ryan McCarty, Patty Arbor, Tom Barlow's here, another poet. We got Winston Munn, Jesse A., Lori Flanagan, Nina Avedon, Michael Ketchum. Well, great to see you all. We're going to have fun workshopping some poems today. And we're going to do like what we always do, which is to give that workshop experience. It's so valuable in MFA programs. But who needs an MFA when you can meet a new poet every Monday night here, learn from them, learn from the critique of the week. We'll workshop things. We have a great group. It's better than like 12 people in a grad program sitting around the table. There's wonderful poets here, all sharing their opinions and thoughts on these poems. And that's the audience for poetry. That's who you're trying to make interested in your work, because attention is the currency of the era. If you're here and you have a submission that you've submitted and we haven't gotten to yet, please let me know right now. We'll do one person that is here if we've got someone, and then we'll go back through the oldest submissions in the queue. I'm going to have to call some really old ones because we've got like, looking back into April still, and we just started getting too many submissions when I was reminding too many people that you could do this. So we've got 233 in the queue, and that's just more than we can get to. That's like a year's worth of stuff. So we are going to, let's see. So Katie Scruggs Galloway has one. Okay, perfect. Well, there you go. We'll do Katie from August. That's perfect. Yeah. Nina Avedon. Well, hopefully we'll get to you next week, Nina. But let's start with Katie Scruggs Galloway. And I'll scroll. She says it's from August. I'm going to just scroll down until I find it. Is that stupid, or should I actually put it in the search bar? Let's see. August. Yeah, I probably should just put it in the search bar, but hang on. Maybe just do it this way. We're going to scroll till we find Katie there. I think. Okay. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to put it in the search. Hang on one second. Okay, where is the search bar? There we go. Galloway. Okay. There we go. Okay, so we got two poems from Katie Scruggs Galloway. We'll start with, as always, leave as many comments as you can, like what works, what doesn't. We'll talk about anything that comes up and makes sense. You know, if you're watching the critique, that I sort of take a more holistic view than most editors and workshoppers. I care about like the whole experience that we get out of the poem more than like the little minutia of like which words and where the line break should be. That all adds into the greater effect of what poems are doing, but it really always seems to me that like the sum total is what's the most valuable and what most people sort of need help with. You know, I think it's sort of almost like a cop-out to just talk about the small details, you know, when it's really the bigger picture that makes poems work or not. And so that's why we focus on that here. And so Katie has two poems for us and some general commentary. If you submit, which you can do by going to rattle.com, go up into the content bar and say that, go down to Critique of the Week. You can submit two poems there, and through Submittable, like always, it's free to do, and we will get to you. Hang on, I gotta mute my phone. 1 second. There we go for that. That's better. Okay, so anyway, Katie says this. There's a little comment menu or comment field you can put your thoughts in if you have any specific questions. I try not to read about what the poems are about, but more general things. We don't want to give that away too soon. So these are two poems that I still like after staring at them for too long. Well, that's a dangerous thing too. I feel proud of them. I tried to let the music lead the way in revision and distill them to what is essential and honest. So that's a good thing to do. But I still wonder, are they landing? Are there any areas where momentum is lost, or any lazy habits that I'm oblivious to rearing their heads in these poems? Thanks for your help and the honest critique. Go ahead, I can take it. Well, great. Well, thanks so much, Katie. And you're definitely a great participant here, so thanks for being here a lot of the weeks, especially lately. Let's take a look at these two poems. So first up we have, and if you want to find Katie's elsewhere, you get Katie K. Galloway. K is in just the letter K, Galloway at substack.com. So find Katie there if you want to catch up. Let's see. I'm going to zoom in. It's a bit small on the screen. Let me zoom in, and we'll take a look. The first poem is called With Popcorn Crumbs Sunk in My Bra, I Love You. So I like the title right off the bat. That's a fun title. Now let's read it. With popcorn crumbs sunk in my bra, I love you. For lunch, we shared popcorn, one cigarette, and a Diet Coke. It was a weird, perfect day, which is why I was so caught off guard when I found myself slamming the sedan door shut, walking anywhere, nowhere, away from the impulse to degrade myself by begging for empathy from the man who, earlier that day, was tossing popcorn into my mouth. You're my only toss, chomp, and my always. We've felt 25 since we were 17, already in love, until we had a baby at 26 and felt like children ourselves. But no phase or phrase feels so old as we've had this fight 100 times. Ego's hands slip under my puppet's skin, and we perform my oldest wounds to an interactive audience that claps back in defense. Love is not a trick up the sleeve, but I see it now as his arm, bending at the elbow, repeating the motion until we get it right, and I open my mouth. Yeah, Danette Burmy says this has a nice rhythm to it, and it does, I agree. Kimberly Gibson Trent says the word empathy in poems gives me ick. Terry Miller says popcorn in the title and first line. I wonder if kernel in the title would be better. Well, the first thing, so I like the general concept of the poem. Yeah, Kimberly Gibson Trent says I love the opening and the conversational rhythm. Yeah, I like that too. I like the voice of the poem, and I like the general concept. I like focusing on this moment of tossing popcorns. The title is funny, and sort of that sort of raw and honest kind of way that makes you interested. So it's a good title. Yeah, but here, this is the main thing. Jamie Thomas says, overall, I really like this. It stalls a little around the third stanza, though. Yeah, and I feel like it doesn't quite get the picture that it paints of sort of the situation and the relationship, I guess, isn't as clear as it would make a really strong connection emotionally to the poem. So I feel like it's losing a little bit of like seeing the actual relationship, and that's like keeping us at a little bit of a distance. So let's see. So let's read a little more closely. So with popcorn crumbs sunk in my bra, I love you. For lunch, we shared popcorn, one cigarette. So one thing Terry Miller did suggest, and it is, if you repeat a word without sort of modifying it or expanding or twisting it, it does weaken that word a little bit and the impact that it has in your mind. It's like, it's really because those neurons have already fired, so they can't fire as strong. You don't get as much spark across the synapses there if you just used it. And like if you think like it's like a dimming light bulb filament or something after the first flash, and then you don't get as much of a jump to the next one. That's kind of how your brain works, and so you lose a little bit. And I think maybe instead of he said kernel, but I don't think kernel's working either of those places. I would say instead. Like we shared a bag or a, what do you call it? A microwave bag? Is it something like that? Like reference that. And then we know you're talking about the popcorn. It kind of leads right in. We get more of an idea of how it was made too. Okay. So anyway, that's one thing I would change. For lunch, we shared popcorn, one cigarette, and a Diet Coke. I know I just said I wasn't going to talk much about line breaks, and we really don't. I think the whole poem with this really long line and the couplets it feels sort of haphazard. And there's a haphazard way that the line break after the and is what we would call a weak line break. And there's a reason, like if you look at James Tate's poems, his later poems, like, the one with the goat, the more surreal ones that are more like prose poems-ish, he's got this way of completely de-emphasizing the lines. So you don't pay attention to and you get more of the image and the story. There's really a continuum between how physical the poem is, the music of it, and how much you want your imagination to be running with like a movie in your head. And if you step back and don't have the poem, if you step back and have the poem like not be presented as a poem, you get more of the movie a little bit, and you can sort of play with that line a little bit. Wayne the Poet says Kernel is an unpopped piece, I believe. Yeah, the Kernel is an unpopped piece, but you wouldn't be throwing the unpopped pieces at, expecting your, hopefully not. You don't want your wife to choke on one, so, yeah. And maybe, I think, PMB might have said, I didn't see it though. Popcorn doesn't need to be in the title. It could be just with crumbs sunk in my bra, I love you. That works too. Not as vivid. I would sort of just give us a little bit more of the situation by sharing what kind of, like a little description of the bag there maybe. But anyway, the line break, I think, the poem doesn't have a real sense of why it's breaking lines where it is. And, it's not to keep them sort of at a regular length. It's not for the pacing. It's not for the natural pauses. And this, this dangling and there sort of breaks up the rhythm a little bit. So I would just move the Diet Coke up to that line and just let it be sort of, if you're going to have poems that are sort of ragged and all over the place as far as the line lengths, at least make them fit with the way where we pause the most and things like that. And so having that first whole sentence be on one line, then it was a weird, perfect day, and another line sort of highlights them and makes it work better. Which is why I was so caught off guard when I found myself slamming the sedan door shut, walking anywhere, nowhere, away from the impulse to degrade myself by begging for empathy from the man who earlier that day was tossing popcorn in my mouth. So this sentence is a very long, and I think this is where, and I think somebody said that around the third stanza it loses the sort of the for energy. And I think this is a long stretch of a sentence. It moves around a lot. We go from, we're slamming the door shut, walking anywhere, nowhere, away from the impulse to degrade myself. That's one concept. By begging for empathy, which is another concept. For the man who earlier that day was tossing popcorn in my mouth, which is another concept. So we move a lot in time and place in this one sentence, and it's just a lot without anything really grounding it or connecting to it. So I think that transition there mainly is what makes the poem feel less connected than it should. And so I think maybe making that transition a little better. So maybe stepping back and telling the story a little bit of how you walked away, like what you were walking away from, like what just happened. Instead of talking about the impulses in an abstract way and sort of cramming it and sort of rushing through the story of that part, tell that story a little bit with a sentence or two. I kind of have a feeling that given you said you were sitting on a revision a lot for this poem, that you told that before, but just try to rush through it a little bit. And I think as a result of that, we don't sort of see what happened there as well as we could. If we saw a little bit of the argument in the fight, and then we went back in time to the tossing part, the next line, you're my only toss chump, my always, that becomes sweet and interesting, and we're sort of connected again. So I think really it's rushing through this that made the poem feel a little bit less emotionally connecting than it could have been. We felt 25 since we were 17, already in love. I think it's a great line. It's just one of those ones that's really interesting to think about, like what you mean and how it makes sense. So that's what makes the line really good, or this one anyway. Until we had a baby at 26 and felt like children ourselves. So that's really nice too. That tells a lot of the relationship. And even though it's an abstract kind of explanation, it's still letting us know a lot of the background really in a quick way. So that has a lot of content and helps propel our connection and story forward. So that's a good couplet right there. But no phase or phrase feels so old as we've had this fight 100 times. And I think here's another place. Here we wanted to see a little bit of the fight. Here, I think you can just expand on that a little bit and like take us to one of those times where you've said that old phrase and like what's going on. Maybe look at some detail, like just pull us into that scene just for a moment so we can feel one of those fights that we've had 100 times and maybe, what it's about or what my hands are doing or what the scenery is like or just some little detail would really help make that little bit come to life. Ego's hands slip under my puppet skin and we perform the oldest wounds and interact to an interactive audience that claps back in defense. So here, let me look at the comment still. It wasn't at the bottom. Yeah. As Kimberly Gibson Trent says, lots of narrative rushed in the age, history, and having a baby. What if we could see the grown baby make an appearance in the poem, lending a reason to tell the history? And Jamie Thomas says, I tend to pack a lot into a line too, and I found it rewarding process to go back and slow them down. Sometimes a whole other poem comes out too. Yeah. And then, Leslie Ann Skekterson says, just listen to an older Poetry Space on plating the poem. For me, the long line in the second sentence takes away from the words. Yeah, that's a good Poetry Space to look over, or to read back through. It is, it matters how poems are presented, just in how we read it. Terry Miller also says present tense might be better where possible. Yeah. So I think, to me, it's just... I like a lot of the details in the poem. It's just having these, instead of being abstractions that we brush past, having a little detail here in the specific and here in the specific would make the poem come to life a lot more. Ego's hands slip under my puppet skin. I think maybe this one in a rare... I think maybe just not naming. I think it's a little too much. I think there's a little bit, there's a tendency to sort of go a little too far with descriptions too. So the impulse to degrade myself by begging for empathy is a lot of concept to get in, and like more than a line needs to keep us engaged. It's like a little too much. And I kind of feel the same way with the ego's hands slip under my puppet skin. Like if we had the hands, like as if hands are slipping under my puppet skin while we perform my oldest wounds, like if we just wonder, instead of like labeling what hands those are, I think it would make sense. Yeah, as our vid note says, and I'm not getting the puppet skin. I think it's just a little too much to follow. But if we pull back a little bit, it'll make sense a little more. Yeah. Okay. And we perform my oldest wounds to an interactive audience that claps back in defense. Love is not a trick up the sleeve, but I see it now as his arm, bending at the elbow, repeating the motion until we get it right. See, I really do like I guess what I love about the poem is the comparison of the puppet, and then the arm becomes, you think it's going to relate to the puppet, and instead it ends up being that arm like throwing in the popcorn, trying to get it right, repeating the motion until we get it right, and I open my mouth. And I think that transition is a really good one. Yeah. Sandra Fee says, I can totally see this as a flash fiction piece. Yeah. Let's see. Rose Leonard says, his arm bending at the elbow. I like the physicality of this, but I'm left unsure. Is this arm throwing popcorn, or is he also violent or else giving pleasure? Yeah. Oh, interesting. Katie Struggs Galloway says this was actually accepted for publication as creative nonfiction. I tried to swap it out in the critique sub, but happy for these notes all the same. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't notice that. Yeah, there's an extra updated one. But I don't really look at those. Okay. Let's see. Interesting. So Terry Miller's great topic of a haibun. And yeah, I think if you could use it as a haibun to make that extra leap. That often works. It does take, so to pull it out of submittable, which is what I have to do when a submission is like this. Hang on, and I'll get the new poems and we'll look at that instead. I don't know if it's the same issue as before, but hang on. We'll open this. Okay. Yeah, we've got some comments on there. Let's take a look. Are these poems? Yeah, these are a bit long. So, Katie, do you want us to do Crying on Speakerphone, or do you want us to do Wake Up, It's the Last Day of 8th Grade Again? Let me know, and we'll do one of those, the other, because there's two totally different poems, I guess, here. Right? Yeah. Oh, no, one's the same. Anyway. Okay, but yeah. So I think fleshing out those parts in a little detail is the main thing, and also I really would recommend that episode of the Poetry Space. Like somebody recommended, just for the concept of making the poems feel. It's like you want it to feel like you have intention for every choice you make, because that's the way that we trust you to take us on a good place. And you're sort of willing to let yourself go into the voice of the speaker. Because you got to remember that the real medium for any poem is the reader's own breath. Like, you inhabit our body and you breathe for us with a poem. And that takes a lot of like letting go, and to let yourself go and to allow someone to really, become that other person through that powerful empathy that poems do. We have to have some confidence in you that you're going to make it worthwhile to sort of give up on that. And so having it look like we're going to trust it is a really important element. And so keeping it's really not like there's one rule. It's just a sense of intentionality that you want to maintain throughout the poem. And I think having, listen to that episode and just think about the way it's presented. I do like there's couplets and it looks, it's not unpleasant on the page, but it is a little inconsistent. Let me see what, I have like one too many windows open. So she wants, cry out on speakerphone. Okay. So let's take a look at that one, and we'll switch over just in case. It is it's harder to get to and takes more time when it's an attachment, but at least I can actually live edit them too, which helps. So we'll do Crying on Speakerphone or A Good Life, which was here, like that. Crying on Speakerphone or A Good Life. Okay. And this is the second poem by Katie Scruggs Galloway. Here we go. Take a sip of coffee. And Crying on Speakerphone or A Good Life. No one loves noise like Paw Paw, driving to the dump with a howling truck exhaust, his hearing loss the cause or consequence. What difference does it make? He claps his hands louder than the screen door swinging shut. Clap, clap. In a heartbeat, he says, echoing his wife's, anything you need, please call me. Their best friend is dying, and they visit, though he's forgotten them. The wife says we had a good life, yet she'd take more if she could get it. Who wouldn't? So few truths are as sturdy as a scaffolding I dare again to climb. The best of humanity is I am here. Garden hose in hand, standing in the neighbor's smoking garage, driving bread to my best friend's house the day after her miscarriage. The shock that anyone cares enough to show up. The shelter of hanging our heads together, a sort of bridge, a scaffolding I dare to climb. I'll be there, fast as the porch door swinging open again. Yeah. Terry Miller says present tense is a great choice in this poem. Burmese is not a fan of the onomatopoeia. Yeah, and Kimberly Gibson Trent says, I love the title already. Crying on Speakerphone or A Good Life. Yeah. And Ryan McCarty says the garden hose couplet is such a great characterization, so much in those two details. Dry Montito's got some advice. Every successful poem must, 1, get the reader's interest, 2, earn the reader's trust, 3, pay back the reader's investment. I'm interested in what a poet should do when the 3 imperatives are in conflict. Yeah, good point. Winston Munn says this is much superior to the first. It feels more whole. Do you feel how, there's an arc to it. And I think that's pretty much what, what Dry Montito was talking about with pay back the reader's investment. Having a sense that we went somewhere and it was worth going, Yeah, and Kimberly Gibson Trent says, I like a lot of this, especially the dialogue, which I feel is promised in the title. Garage miscarriage rhyme is genius, says Abigail Cargo. And, okay, let's read it again more slowly. Crying on Speakerphone or A Good Life. Yeah, I do. I like the title. Crying on Speakerphone is a good title on its own, but there's something added about that, too, adding the conversation, the quote in there. No one loves the noise like Paw Paw, driving to the dump with a howling truck exhaust. His hearing lost the cause or consequence. What difference does it make? So I'm a little bit unclear as far as what the Paw Paw is at that point. He claps his hands louder than the screen door swinging shut. Clap, clap. In a heartbeat, he says, echoing his wife's, anything you need, please call me. So far at this point, yeah. So I'm just reading some comments. I felt like I'm a little unclear about what's going on, but I'm still curious enough that I'm being drawn into the poem. Yeah, Sidney Guntherman says like the present tense better in this poem. Yeah, so Kimberly Gibson translates Papa as a grandpa, right? Yeah. But what I don't understand is why. How hearing loss, like, is the noise, like he can't hear the truck exhaust. So what noise? I don't know. I'm a little confused about what's actually going on with the noise. That's what I mean. He claps his hands louder than the screen door swinging shut. Clap, clap. In a heartbeat, he says, echoing his wife's, anything you need, please call me. Their best friend is dying. So it's a nice, so the opening, 3 or 2 stanzas set up. I'm curious. I'm interested in what's going on. I don't really know yet. And I don't think that's necessarily, yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, Kimberly Gibson Trent says, I'm totally clear in stanza 1. Love the sound details and even the throwaway. What difference does it make? Yeah. Nancy Sebek says, move stanza 3 to be the first stanza. No, I don't think so. I'm not saying it's not, it's bad that we don't know. I'm saying it draws us in enough that I'm a little confused. I'm just explaining how I feel reading the poem. I'm a little confused, but it's enough to keep me reading. Their best friend is dying, and they visit, though he's forgotten them. His wife says, we had a good life, yet she'd take more if she could get it. Who wouldn't? So few truths are as sturdy as the scaffolding I dare again to climb. The best of humanity is I'm here. Yeah, so the scaffolding is really nice. I like that. Garden hose in hand, standing in the neighbor's smoking garage, driving bread to my best friend's house the day after her miscarriage. Yeah. Kimberly Gibson Trent says in stanza 2, Papa is saying he'll be back in a heartbeat. Yeah. All right, well, anyway. Garden hose in hand, standing in the neighbor's smoking garage, driving bread to my best friend's house the day after her miscarriage. The shock that anyone cares enough to show up. The shelter of hanging our heads together, a sort of bridge. See, I like this too. I like the way we move through different sort of registers here and different people speaking in a way that works really nicely. So the shelter of hanging our heads together, a sort of bridge, like that's what someone said, is really nice. A scaffolding I dare to climb. The one thing is, this is repeated in a way that so few truths are as sturdy as the scaffolding I dare again to climb. The best of humanity is I'm here. And I think it's a great line here. It's a lesser line here, and so having it here too detracts from the. Now this is the kind of thing when we talk about repeating stuff being usually not a good idea. It detracts from how good it is in this spot because it's a great line here. Yeah. Anyway. The shelter of hanging our heads together, a sort of bridge, a scaffolding I dare to climb. I'll be there as fast as the porch door swinging open again. And so it turns out that the clap, clap is the screen door swinging shut. Terry managed to switch the ladder to the first scaffolding. Yeah, I am. I think with this one, I would like to just be a little bit more in on the story. So Kimberly Gibson Tran says that she gets the whole way through, I think. And I'm just a little bit I don't know. I have a little bit of trouble following the progression of it. And I guess maybe somebody said, yeah, it was D. Coleman said, I don't have a sense of where the narrator is in the beginning stanzas. And I think both poems have a similar thing where there's interesting content. It's about something that matters, and those are two difficult things to come up with. The voice feels pretty steady and confident too, but I still have don't have a sense of like where the voice. There's one thing missing, I guess. It's a little different what's missing, but there's one sort of element of connection missing in each that make it feel less emotional than I normally would or I could feel for the poem. And I think in this case, in the first one, it was because we didn't get to see enough of like the situation that we were sort of the fight that they got into. And so we didn't really feel that. And then you don't feel the contrast as much because of it. In this one, you don't really feel a sense of like who the speaker is and where they are in relation to it. We get a little bit of that with the driving bread to my best friend's house the day after her miscarriage. That feels like a personal story. But the rest doesn't feel as personal. I mean, maybe the garden hose in hand, standing in the neighbor's garage, smoking garage, that feels it too. But more with the my, and we have a real sense of that happening. Whereas where we are, like D. Coleman said, with the first two stanzas, like we're sort of an omniscient. I guess that's the thing. We're like an omniscient narrator for a lot of it. And there's no sense of the self that's there. And so we don't really feel like we're in the shoes of the speaker as much. Yeah. So I guess that's the way to explain it. Jenny Middleton says, the second half of the poem has a different tone to the opening lines. I don't think these are written from a child's perspective. I think I need a bit more clarity about who the speaker is. Yes, that's what I'm saying too. Exactly. This is what, like, if you look at... Sorry. I mean, look at a poem you love. You just pick any poem you love. I think the one that comes to mind, because I used it not too long ago, was that Abandoned Bicycle by George Bulgare. If you look at that poem, you have a real sense of the speaker having a consistent voice and it coming from like a place, And if you look at any poem you love, let's look at like maybe the farthest poem from George Bulgare as I can think of off the top of my head, which is let me pull this up. Haven't shared this one in a while, but it's a great poem. Right there. Look at Song by Bridget Pagine Kelly. And feel how, even though it's a totally different than like in tone and style than that George Bulgare poem or any of his poems or a Billy Collins poem or something. It's so much more intense and less more casual. Like the whole point of a Bulgare poem or a Billy Collins poem is to be this like confidant, and you're sort of like, whispering a like lighthearted sort of secret about life or something. Here we have a lot more intensity, but we still have that sense. I'm just going to read the first few lines, but feel how this, listen, there was a goat's head hanging by ropes in a tree. All night it hung there and sang. And those who heard it felt it a hurt in their hearts and thought they were hearing the song of a night bird. They sat up in their beds and then they lay back down again. In the night wind, the goat's head swayed back and forth, and from far off it shone faintly, the way the moonlight shone on the train track miles away, beside which the goat's headless body lay. This song, it's one of the most powerful poems, I think. It makes me cry every time I read the whole thing. But do you notice how there's a consistency in the tone of the voice? And here it's like somebody with authority telling you something you need to hear. And there's that impression that moves through the entire poem. Whereas like in the Bulgare example of the Abandoned Bicycle is this sort of like, I'm confiding this in you while I'm sort of have a half smile and don't you notice, and we're both friends, and we're all here hanging out. There's very different sort of intensity in this poem, but it's got the same consistency. And that's what we really connect with, is the consistency of that voice. Like, we have the sense of a presence of the voice. And it can be, and there's all sorts of different presences. There's like, I'm amused, and I'm authority, or I know what I'm going to tell you right now, and you need to hear this, which is sort of the song type voice. And if we look back, at there, did I close out of that poem? No. Oh, there it is. Okay. It's sort of missing that sense of like, I'm telling, it shifts. People are talking about the shift. And the voice and that sense of where the speaker is coming from is different in this place than it is later when we get to like this part. And especially here is very different. And so my advice for this one is to really think about who's speaking to who in this poem. Is it me? Am I the speaker in my poem? Is it a more omniscient speaker? Is it speaking to somebody I know personally and closely? Am I talking to my mother? Or am I talking to a large stadium full of people? We behave and act, and our voice is different depending on those kind of relationships. And that's the thing that's kind of inconsistent in this poem, I think. And so my advice would be to really think about who's speaking to who as they're speaking this poem. And then I think that, because there's interesting details in here, I think that will resolve the inconsistency that makes it less connecting than it could be. Okay. Hopefully that made sense. Let me look at the last few comments before we move on. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, so Katie says, I was overhearing this conversation on speakerphone, observing. Garden Hose Bread are memories. I'll think on this. Okay, so and someone else said, I forgot about the speakerphone. Yeah, so that's a great point. So the position of the narrator is, I'm overhearing. See, I imagine it as, this is how I took the title, which is that at one point during this, I was crying on the speakerphone. And so I didn't really get a sense of like, I'm overhearing this. So maybe make that a little more clear, and just who, touch back onto that so we really get a sense that we're listening and we're overhearing. You're talking about what you're hearing. I think that'll make the sort of situation of the speaker consistent enough that we really connect with it. I think that's what the situation is. But yeah, okay. Well, that makes a lot more sense now, actually, for what's missing. It's that we can't really tell if that's what it is. It drifts in and out of being that. Okay. Well, anyway, let's move on. Thanks for sharing this really interesting poem to look at. Katie, I'm glad you were here. Let's see. Let me clear that. Look again. Somebody else said they were here too. If I can find that. Let's see. Well, I'm not seeing that. Okay. Well, let's go to the oldest poem in the queue. We should clear out some of the back log. Okay. So the oldest poem in here, we're still looking at way at March. We can't do this much longer. I have to just start clearing things out. And this poem is it's by Neil N.A. and from Virginia. We have we have two. Yeah, we have two poems here. No general questions. Let's dive right in. The first is Sestina. As you probably know, you might know, Sestina is my least favorite form because you can't really, I don't know, but they just go on. I think it's the forced stretching that makes the Sestina my least favorite. Sometimes they work wonderfully, like we did nominate, of course, Chelsea McClellan's Sestina Sophia for a pushcart prize is so great, but that's pretty rare. There's not a lot of great Sestinas. And I think maybe because you just force yourself to stretch. Maybe it's because you get the longest line you want. There's that Sestina creep. But this Sestina already, that it's slender, already gives me hope, Abigail Kirk says, oh my God, I hate sestinas. Yeah, I think it's because there's that tendency to go make the lines as long as you need to get to the word. And so that ends up being such long lines that you don't really hear or notice. They're so far away from each other. The other thing that was really helpful, I think it was Aaron Murphy who had a book, am I thinking about right? Aaron Murphy had a book of sestinas, and her trick to make them work was to have each stanza be self-contained a little bit in the way that like a guzzle is. And that keeps it from feeling that like you're just forced to stretch it, because then it's making it look at it from like whatever it is, 8 different angles or whatever. Anyway, let's read this one. While she was reading my poems, the air held me gently. Oh God, how gently on a summer night. Is a poor man with his money, as I am in love, sick and spent, and full knowing of his follies. She, unknowing of my follies, sat like the ducks do in poems I had written, with focus spent on capturing the birds of God. They are spending time like money in their silent ponds at night. She reads like music late at night. She smiles. I reply that follies such as these cost more than money, that ducks outside can read these poems and know not of their meaning, God. Yet she only laughed and then spent that lonely night with me. We spent our morning hour kissing goodnight to the people who were then. God looked on us and shook his head. Follies such as these were fit only for poems, and only those who cared for money. Where love is currency, money cannot measure the hours spent breathing new life into poems, or in writing away the night on those foolish lovers' follies made by and with our loving God, so he can know us. She is God to me. There is more worth than money spent in her name than the follies mortals make in their arts. I spent so many long fortnights on these mere words, these foul poems, where God for 7 days had spent them on a song worth no money, and nights making men for the follies found in poems. Well, this is much better, as I suspected, given the short lines, than a typical sestina. So this is nice. I think it does. Let's see. Yeah. Kim Gibson Trent says, well, this is a weaker sestina. Too much incoherency built to just get the words. Wish I was getting to the story to illuminate the Shi'ai relationship. Yeah, I agree with my general comment was, I wish I was getting more of the story illuminated. It does repeat, but I like the way that you can hear the concision makes it feel better to read than most sestinas. It felt a little, it started, so my impression reading through was around, I was enjoying it. I was waiting for more detail, but I liked it. And around here, it started to feel a little bit redundant, which sestinas get to. And then I liked the way it turned around in the last. I liked the follies found in poems. I liked ending that way. But it has Rose Denar says, I feel like this would be a better poem if it wasn't a sestina. And it does. It falls into the thing, which is why sestina is my least favorite form, where it really feels like you're stretching to get it to the length you need it to be a sestina. And I wonder if maybe the whole sestina would be a better sort of form or genre of poetry if it was like like a pantoum allowed you to do as many lines, or a ghazal allows you to do as many couplets as you want to get to where you want to go, because it feels like it's repeating itself and spinning its wheels a little bit toward the end. But I think there's a good use of words, because we have, oh God, they're words that can be used different ways, and that's really nice. Yeah. Terry Miller says maybe a preachier tone in the second part. Yeah. And Leslie Ann Skekterson says, it sounds nice, but doesn't go far enough for me. That's the thing, I think. It lays out this. I would like to... Okay, while she was reading my poems, the air held me gently. Oh, God, how gently on the summer night. I like that. Is a poor man with his money, as I am in love, sick and spent, and full knowing of his follies. She, knowing of my follies, sat like the ducks do in poems I'd written. See, I like that. I like the ducks are funny. If there was more, I guess what I'm missing, at the beginning we have this weird appearance of the ducks, which is sort of strange and quirky and interesting. And we don't really have that later in the poem. If we thought about it, like put a duck in every stanza, like put some surprising thing that you didn't expect at all in every stanza, one element, and I think that would make it feel like the poem was progressing a little more. But we only have the ducks here, and I think there's just not enough ducks in this poem. Not that you want any more ducks, but what the ducks represent, which is something surprising. Yeah. Anyway, so the ducks do in my poems I had written with focus spent on capturing the birds of God. They are spending time like money in their silent ponds at night. She reads like music late at night. She smiles. I reply that follies such as these cost more than money. The ducks outside can read these poems and not know of their meaning. God. Yet she only laughed and then spent. So, we have the ducks. The ducks come back, which is not as interesting. That lonely night with me, we spent our morning hour kissing goodnight to the people we were then. That's a good concept, but I'm not really seeing enough. I just want a little bit more detail, a little bit more surprise coming, and then that line would really, really hit, but it's already starting to feel repetitive. God looked on us and shook his head. Follies such as these were fit only for poems, and only those who cared for money. Where love is currency, money cannot measure the hours spent breathing new life into poems. And here it gets really monotonous. When running away the night on those foolish lovers' follies made by and with our loving God so he can know us. She is God to me. That's a nice, when you're using the words in a little different way, that's always something I want to try to do with Sestinas. She is God to me. There is more worth and money spent in her name than the follies mortals make in their arts. It's getting very redundant. So 2 suggestions. You could take one path or the other. I'd say make it a shortened Sestina. Don't make it go on forever. One thing. The other option would be to add more surprising details. Put more things like the ducks that appear that are just surprising, and that'll make the poems work a little more. D. Coleman says, what is all this talk of putting more birds in our poems? Yeah. Brian O'Sullivan says, a Sestina trick I learned recently. If you have a rhyme scheme in the first stanza so that the rhyme words appear in different places in other stanzas, that can add some musical interest. No, that's interesting, yeah. And then Mary Keating says, I think if the poet really thought about the different meanings of follies, it would help the poem become more interesting and varied. Yeah, that's the thing, too. Katie and I were at the, what is it called? The Round Top Poetry Festival this spring. And I never knew what follies were, in an architectural perspective, which is that they're these sort of fake ruins that rich people. The story is that in Europe, you only had a really cool estate in the Victorian times if it was so old and big that you had some like old Roman ruins there, and so people started faking ruins, and they were called follies, and so this grounds where the Round Top Poetry Festival is full of follies and everything, like the theater where they do the poetry. And it's, music festivals and things too, but the main stage is in this thing that looks like a 150-year-old Grand Opry, and you realize that it was only made in like 2002 or something. And there's all these old weird ruins everywhere. There's old sculptures, and none of it's old, but it all feels old. Those are follies. So that's one folly you can use in that, and things like that. Yeah, but just add more detail that are surprising turns to make that poem more interesting. Or shorten it and make it a mini Sestina, or shorten Sestina, curdle Sestina. Okay, let's take a look at the other one. Sorry. Communion. Oh, it's Neil Dongre, which is not in Submittable, so you might want to add that name to Submittable. But anyway, and yeah. Communion. I am not a religious man warmed by the small candles, but I am drinking in the most beautiful dark reverently, standing alone after climbing the side of a steep and lonely mountain, just like a church, or like some mice do, or so like some mice do, with a kind with a kind, quiet history and the negotiation of all things. That was a weird sentence to read. Let me just start over. Communion. I'm not a religious man warmed by the small candles. I mean, that works. But I am drinking in the most beautiful dark reverently. I mean, you want to comma after dark to make it not trip over it. Standing alone after climbing the side of a steep and lonely mountain, just like a church or like some mice do, with a kind, quiet history and the negotiation of all things. I'm not sure what that do is, so I trip over that too. I'm a little confused. The air is sweet, cold, and sharp, a bee sting on the nose, a bell tolls on early morning's prayer. At the summit, where my fingers weave churches for the air, they worship in the burrows of my flesh, which becomes me, which becomes hard, storied wood and stone holding fast against the rain, where the line-steepled pinkies I have are pointing up, defiant. So the rest of my skin can worship as well and laugh with me a deep sound, a single whale bellow, an eagle's youngish scream, reverent in the rib cage of my burial ground. I collect rain for a joyous moment and lean back with my friends, abound in mirth. My hands are inhabited by mice, mistaking me for God, and pray for deliverance in the church of my fingers. Yet their eyes, my prize, their quietude and sighs, are as beautiful as the lies of Satan, a solemn summer promise, and apple trees on ravished fruits. Okay. Well, this feels a little bit... Yeah, so I agree with what Ryan McCarty says here. The first simple sentence is beautiful, but then the longer meandering next sentence loses me. I fall into the long sentence wander a lot, though. Yeah. There are a lot of it. It feels almost like, it feels almost like a Sestino too, with the way the words repeat so frequently. And that's the kind of thing. So I talked a little bit at the beginning of not, which is a common thing. You don't want to repeat words. But here, I think that if you do it a lot, then it becomes repetition, which can work. Cherry Miller says a lot of Bible in this poem. Rose Leonard says confused. Yeah, I'm not really following it. Jamie Thomas says this is incredibly well written, but a little old-fashioned. And Morgan Finney says, in the second sense, I'm not sure who they are, fingers or churches. Yeah, there's some things like that where it's just hard to follow on that literal level. So I'm not a religious man warmed by the small candles, but I am drinking in the most beautiful dark reverently, standing alone after climbing the side of a steep and lonely mountain, just like a church or like some mice do. I think the do should be on the other side of that hyphen. Sorry to keep tripping over that one. With a kind of quiet history and the negation of all things. The air is sweet, cold, and sharp, a bee sting on the nose, a bell tolls an early morning's prayer. So he's drinking and walking up the side of a lonely mountain. At the summit where my fingers weave churches for the air, they worship... Yeah, so who... I think this is a problem I had too. The they, I'm not sure. Who's worshiping? Yeah, that's the one that tripped him up too. Yeah, they worship in the burrows of my flesh. Because we're talking about mice too. I'm a little lost at who the they is. Worship in the burrows of my flesh, which becomes me, which becomes hard, storied wood and stone holding fast against the rain. So suddenly it's raining, and why is my flesh becoming the wood? I'm a little lost here. Where the line-steepled pinkies I have are pointing up defiant, so the rest of my skin can worship as well and laugh with me, a deep sound, a single whale bellow, an eagle's youngish scream. So we're making a steeple with our hands here. It would be cool if it was like becoming literal. I think there's an opportunity for that here, but it doesn't feel like that's where it's going. Reverent in the rib cage of my burial ground. Like who? I'm reverent in the rib cage of my own burial ground. There are just a lot of things in this poem that sound nice, but then I don't know exactly what they mean. Reverent in the rib cage of my own burial ground. I collect rain for a joyous moment. So I lean back with my friends, abound in mirth. I don't know why friends are there suddenly. My hands are inhabited by mice, mistaking me for God, and pray for deliverance in the church of my fingers. So did he die? And that's like his body is there. It's raining on his... yeah. Yet their eyes, my prize. Quietude any size. The rhymes here, it's just too... It feels too, like, I don't know, cheesy and forced. their eyes, my prize, their quietude and sighs, it's too much, are as beautiful as the lies of Satan, a solemn summer promise, and apple trees and ravished fruits. Yeah, I just don't follow. As Winston Munsis is straining to sound poetic. Yeah, Morgan Finney says, I think a lot has to do with the church children's game. Here's the church, here's the steeple, but that isn't explicit and it's confusing. Yeah. Yeah, just shorter and more clear what the metaphor is, yeah. There's some nice lines, and it's just too unclear. Yeah. Jamie Thomas says this feels like auditioning for a chapter in the Gospels. Well written, but old-fashioned and too confessional. I don't know. I think it's... I don't know if there's a gospel that is that unclear. Or, Yeah, but Patty Arbor appreciates the sensuous and over-the-top imagery. I like the control of language. I like the way it sounds. Brian O'Sullivan says, I think if there are more of the really surreal lines, like an eagle's youngish scream, it could be one of those rare poems where readers say, I don't know what it means, but I like it anyway. Yeah, it can go a little farther, and that might help it. Wayne the Poet says, is this written by a mountain climber as reverence of a climb? Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, yeah, so just lack of clarity doesn't let us connect, even though we enjoy the sounds, I guess is the some opinion of this one, and I agree with that. So just let us in more. Tell the story. Let us know where we are. I'm not a religious man warned by the small candles. It's a beautiful line. But who are you really, and are you really climbing a mountain, and what's actually going on? I mean, are you Wayne the Poet wonders if you're a mountain climber. I don't know. Is that true? Let us in a little bit more. Shiv Preet Music, Shiv says, to me it sounds a little pretentious. When I sound pretentious, and I do many times, I rewrite the poem from memory, then I get the best lines I love. That might help. Yeah, I agree. It's just trying too hard to sound beautiful, but not really conveying the story enough. Let's move on and do one more submission before we go, as it's just before the hour. And I got to make sure. See, I have a new system where I'm supposed to put it in a different label so I know that we did it, since I'm trying to mass reply to some people. Anyway, next up, we'll do... I just want a short one, though. There's two kind of longer poems here. We'll see what we got. Two longer poems there. Hang on, just bear with me while I find something short. Yeah, people are sending longer poems, right? There's a little string of them. Let's see. You just talk amongst yourselves while I pick a new poem to do. Okay. We have two that are just pasted right in that are pretty short. This is we're looking back at April still, Brian Hickey from Rhode Island has these two poems, Explaining Awake and The Dance Floor. Let's take a look at these and then we'll wrap it up for today. Explaining Awake. Have I ever died? My 5-year-old daughter asked. We were on our way to the funeral home where my father-in-law was being waked. How could I explain to her that you only die once when she had never experienced anything happen just one time? When it comes to death, language fails us. Perhaps fail is too forgiving. Betrayal is a much better word. Try explaining that awake didn't mean my daughter's grandpa was only sleeping at the funeral home. Yeah, so that's nice. I like that. I like that poem. Yeah, Kimmy Gibson Tran says, love poems about kid questions. Terry Miller says, great opening. Yeah, this is very nice. Yeah, and our vid note says, I love the concept of this. Yeah, I love this poem. Like this poem, says Mary Keating. Yeah, Explaining Awake. Have I ever died? My 5-year-old daughter asked. Yeah, that's a great opening. We were on our way to the funeral home where my father-in-law was being waked. How could I explain to her that you only die once when she has never experienced anything happen just one time? When it comes to death, language fails us. I like that line too. So much, the best lines so often are very simple. And when it comes to death, the language fails us. There's so much, emotional depth in that one really simple line. Perhaps fail is too forgiving, and then that modifies it in an even cooler way with a great line break. After the two, perhaps fail is too forgiving, because you don't know what's going to, it's too what? There's a nice anticipation and then forgiving. And yeah, betrayal is a much better word. Try explaining that awake didn't mean my daughter's grandpa was only sleeping at the funeral home. Yeah, so this is nice. Yeah, as PMB says, I think the poem could go further, but forcing it risks ruining it. Yeah, that is my thought too. That it feels like it could, like one more thing could happen. It's like at the level right now of like, oh, that's a pretty good poem, and it could just a little bit more, like one more line or two could make it a great poem. Yeah. And not being understated though too. The whole poem, you don't want like some like, and that's why, like some really, really strong thing. Yeah, our vid note says it feels like it's missing something. And I'm gonna let me do this, because there's a way that let's see, Chris Anderson, who's been on the Rattlecast, he's a deacon. He was in our Poets of Faith issue. He calls these poems leaping poems. And let me read one of those. I don't want that one. I want Reality Homes. Okay. Is this, yeah. There's something where, because he writes so simple and direct and clear about what's going on, that when you do have a leap to something surprising, it feels really profound and allows for like us to fill in the gaps a little bit. We'll take a look at this poem, Reality Homes, by Chris Anderson. And here. The falling of a leaf onto a pond is one movement in a process composed of many movements. It floats for a while crisply, then softens and sinks. It's funny what comes to mind. All day you think about a woman you haven't seen in many years, her soft brown hair, the way the corners of her eyes pull down. It's not that you are filled with longing or regret, but you are filled with something. In a dream you climb a hill on the other side of town. It is an arduous climb. At the end, you are afraid of falling. But then you look down and realize all the houses are exactly like the houses you live in. In the distance, the same kind of highway. Everything is the same. It's just on the other side. And so there's something in this where we move to this dream out of nowhere. Where we're talking about one topic, then we jump to this completely different topic. And the question, everything is the same, it's just on the other side, makes us sort of ponder like the gap that we leaped over. And that's the kind of thing that I feel like is just missing a little bit from this poem. Like, I think maybe if we went somewhere else at the very end, even like, try explaining that awake didn't mean my daughter's grandpa was only sleeping at the funeral home. On the drive back home, we saw something or other, and then something or other, and just letting it sit there with like a leap, like just somehow, yeah, just somehow moving to something different. It's moving to some, like two more lines that moved in time or place or perspective, maybe back to a memory, some different memory. Like what comes up when you think about the story? Because it's really so well written. It is a good poem. I wouldn't want to, you got to be careful about ruining it by pushing it farther, but it feels like it can push farther into some kind of more surprising leap. So if you think about the story, read the poem out loud and watch your mind watching the poem. Like, where does your mind leap to? Where does your daydream drift as you read this? And then tell a little bit about that place, because there's some connection to something else that could push the poem just even deeper and even stronger. And Terry Miller says, perhaps have the daughter whisper to the grandfather, "Time to wake up, Grandpa." And I don't think so. I think there's something else. That's too much the same. I think the poem really needs something different to push it even farther. And the way I'm thinking of a transition is either, on the drive home or the next day, or when I was 5, this happened, some tiny thing, or just a little bit of something, and don't think. This is one of those things where, like, that Bukowski tombstone thing, whereas on Bukowski's tombstone it says, "Don't try." Like, thinking is the mind killer. Like trying to force it. Don't force it. Let it. You're catching a feather. Let whatever this is fall in the palm of your hand. What are you daydreaming about when you read this poem? And then describe that in 2 lines, even if it doesn't seem to make sense. Just go there, and then maybe that's the thing, because it could be a little bit. Yeah, it could go a little bit farther. Let's read the next one, and then we'll wrap up. We're 7 minutes past the hour. The dance floor. It's a cruel trick, the magic the mind plays. What part of the brain malfunctions, allowing the body to reach for someone no longer there? I thought of you while driving past a honky-tonk last night. The lion's den, the dance floor, light through a large illuminated window spread all across the road like spilled memories. Remember when any dive bar with a dance floor was our cheap motel with a mattress? Tell me, at your wedding when the band began to play, you didn't look all around for me. Sorry, I read that poorly. Let's see. Let me read it again. The dance floor. It's a cruel trick of magic the mind plays. What part of the brain malfunctions, allowing the body to reach for someone no longer there? I thought of you while driving past a honky-tonk last night, the lion's den, the dance floor light through a large illuminated window spread all across the road like spilled memories. Remember when any dive bar with a dance floor was our cheap motel with a mattress? Tell me, at your wedding when the band began to play, you didn't look all around for me. Yeah, that is nice too. So when I tripped, I didn't even realize why I was tripping up at the end. That the. It's funny, you don't even notice these things sometimes, which is why it's so hard to proofread. Because I was like tripping all over this line, and it's because there's 2 thes there. Yeah. So Kennedy and Trent, I like the Lion's Den. This one has that kind of leaping that we wanted in the first poem, where we go from a sort of a general sort of philosophical thought to like something that happens sometimes, sort of noticing, and then to a memory, driving here. There's the lion's den is a great description. Also, the light through the large illuminated window spread all across the road like spilled memories. It's a very nice line. Remember when any dive bar with a dance floor was our cheap motel with a mattress? I'm not sure I exactly understand this line. Tell me at your wedding when the band began to play, you didn't look at all. You didn't look all around for me. There's something. So I think the only thing with this poem, and I think, the arc and the smooth progression is nice, exactly as Nancy Sabanek said. I just think it's clunky. Just the phrasing of this is clunky. It's a very simple thing to fix. It's just sort of like not only remove this typo, but also tell me at your wedding, and then a comma there, when the band began to play. And maybe just that you didn't look around for me. Somehow you, and then the break, and then didn't look all around for me is like kind of clunky and trippy too. Yeah, the ending is awkward. If the last 3 lines were written as smoothly as the rest of the poem, I think it would be a great poem. And Kimberly Gibson Trent is interesting that the person being remembered married someone else. Yeah, that's a really nice, surprising, place to go. Rosenar says, I don't know, the last 3 lines work for me. They work as, I think the ending is great as far as what it's saying. But it's just the clunkiness literally of the sentences itself. Like it's missing a comma. I think it needs to touch back on the subject toward the end because it has that long subclause or whatever you call it. So maybe like, tell me at your wedding, comma, when the band began to play, tell me you didn't look around it for me, or something like that. Or maybe even get a little bit more, maybe add one more line with a little more detail to draw that out. Tell me at your wedding, when the band began to play and they picked up the horn, or some kind of little detail about the band, you didn't turn to look for me, or something like that. Maybe it's like the look all around too. There's just something clunky about just the actual sentence. Maybe just didn't turn and look for me is a quicker. It just feels clunky. Yeah. But besides for that, it's a good way to go. Let me do the other poem really quickly, because I really like this poem from Rattle just a couple days ago, and it does the same thing. It's another good example of that movement that we wanted in the first poem and kind of got in this one. But here's another good example, and I think it's just a good way to think about how to move in a poem. So let's read this really quick one too. Remember, this was Saturday's poem of the day, pulled from a back issue by Bill Rector. Autumn. Last night I kept pulling gloves from the pockets of my coat. Oh, abyss of my winter coat's pockets. As they fell, the gloves turned into leaves, curled palms of maples, stubby fingers from oaks, gray fists of ash. I woke up. I thought of you, but then I always do. I considered the hours to come, the first thing to be done and the next. All day my hands were cold. Yeah. So this is the kind of movement and transition, and it's the confidence in going through those movements that makes the poem really work. And so try to have your poems have this sense of movement. So we'll break it down. Last night I kept pulling gloves from the pockets of my coat. And so at first we don't realize, but then quickly we realize it's a dream. Oh, abyss of my winter coat's pockets. Then we had this like emotional reaction. It's kind of playful to the dream we had, like the abyss of my winter coat's pockets. It's a little over the top in a funny way. So we have a different emotional spin on it, which kind of sets us up for the sadness and profundity later. As they fell, the gloves turned into leaves. So that's when we really know for sure it's a dream because of the surrealness of that. Curled into palms of maples, stubby fingers from oaks, gray fists of ash. So then we get all these things the gloves are like hands, and they feel like leaves. It's really cool. And then I woke up. I thought of you. But then I always do. So that how that slows down so much, the dream becomes reality. So we crash into the sadness of the situation. I consider the hours to come, the first thing to be done and the next. And then we go back to this, all day my hands were cold. And we just let it sit there and let you feel that poem. And that's just how to do progression in a poem. And I think it's really, really well done. If you're over at, give it some rattles. Click that button. And we'll put it up the top of the leaderboard. If you like a poem, make sure to do that. We have a whole backlog of poems that we need to sort of be rated to get into like these. If you, show you this over here, we have this whole popular poems leaderboard. Look at this. And, oops, sorry. I was trying to fiddle with that. But anyway, we have popular poems. Let's make the popular poems like be the best poems we have here in Rattle. You can go down thousands of poems in length. Anyway, make sure you click that. We're going to work on that too. But anyway, that's going to be the critique of the week for today. Thanks everybody for joining me. It has been a lot of fun, as it always is. Some great poems being shared here. Some poets that are with us and some that are not, but it's great either way. Now this week coming up after the weekend, the next guest of the Rattlecast is going to be Julia B. Levine. So Julia's been in Poets Respond a few times. She has a book, Ordinary Psalms? I can't see it from here. I think that's what her older book, her full length, is called. But she has a new book called Lullaby for the Sixth Extinction. And that's a chapbook from Wolfson Press that's just out too. Yeah. And anyway, sorry, I was reading a comment. Anyway, yeah, that's going to be the guest, Julie B. Levine. She's a great poet. Looking forward to getting to know her better. That is Radicus number 322. The prompt for this week was to write a poem that's all about breaks. Write a poem that's all about breaks. That was your prompt for this week. The guest, once again, Julia B. Levine, Monday, December 15th. Again, if you were hoping for Billy Collins to be there this week, sorry about that. He really sounded rough. Hopefully he's better now. I should probably check in on him and see how he's doing. But he's going to be back January 19th, so we'll have that as an episode coming up as well. Got great poets lined up. Julie B. Levine is the next one. Manuel Iris is the guest after that. A wonderful poet laureate of Cincinnati who's good friends with Dick Westheimer. And Manuel is a really inspiring poet. He'll be coming up. We got a lot of good stuff going on. No show, note, that week after Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's. But other than that, some great things. Looking forward to it. Hope you have a great weekend. In the meantime, we'll see you then. Goodbye. Oh, yeah, and remember to click the like button if you haven't yet. That always helps. Thanks for the reminder, Katie Scruggs Galloway. All right, bye.